Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which is another way to say carpe diem. It's all about going after the things that you want in life. The thing that I wanted to do this year was to rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time talk about it with real life humans, which has been a really fun thing to do. And we're up leveling this because now I'm getting a chance to talk with people who worked on this show. And before I introduce my guest for today, just a quick housekeeping item on this, although it might not be an issue for this interview, but just so you all know, if you are brand new to the show, the episode recaps are safe for you up until the episode that you're on, spoiler free. These interviews could be spoiler filled. We could mention anything that happened in the show. So just be aware of that up front, just in case. Might not be an issue for this one, but we'll see how it goes. So I'm so excited to welcome my guest for today, who is Melanie Ragone, who is a grip for 17 episodes, I believe, of seasons 1 and 2 of the show. Hello, Melanie.
Hi. Nice
Welcome.
to meet you.
So good to have you here. I have like two competing questions that I want to ask first, but I'm going to just sort of get everybody introduced to you here and say, how did you get connected with this show to begin with? How did this role come to you?
So I was fairly new to the industry when I started on Halt and Catch Fire. And as I have preached to everybody who wants to get into this industry, is it's networking, networking, networking. And I think I knew the best boy or maybe one of the grips that was on the show. And that's how grips get hired. It's not a position that you apply for. It's you either get hired by your fellow crew or the best boy or the key grip knows you. So but I believe that I knew one of the thirds or maybe someone on the rigging crew. I can't remember exactly, but that was how I got folded into the grip crew.
Okay. So the number of times you said grip there gives me this wonderful opportunity to say I watch a lot of interviews. Whenever there's a TV show or a movie that I like, I'll watch interviews about it. And usually those interviews are with actors or directors, maybe a producer, maybe a writer. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, the grips. And I've always thought to myself, that sounds like the coolest job, but I have no idea what it is. So now I get to ask you, hey, what does a grip do? What did you do on the show? Was it different from anything else? What is that job?
So grips primarily are, I mean, in layman's and in a nutshell, are camera support and lighting. Those are that's a very limited introduction, but camera support meaning that no matter where the camera needs to be, whether it's on the dolly, on a crane, in a car, on sticks, on the ground, wherever the camera is, the grips get it there, whether they rig it or whether it's handheld. And then it's supported by the dolly grips, and dolly grips are assigned a camera. So typically you have 2 cameras. If there's 3, you have a C camera. But usually it's A and B. And then you have dolly grips that are assigned for the entire show. They're like tethered to that camera. And then the grips, the rest of the grips in the crew, usually there's 3 or 4, depending on the size of the show. There's usually a core 3 or 4 grips. And then those grips come in and also help the dolly grips, whether they lay track, whether they help them get the dolly into a location, whether it's car rigs. The grips also assist in all of those builds, whether it's an overhead rig. And then we're also lighting. So electric essentially brings the lights to set and turns them on. And then grip comes in and colors, cuts, and diffuses the light. And that's very layman's terms of what we'd actually do. Grip department's very unique in that they work with every other department on set. So it's kind of like, that's why I end up staying in the department for so long, because I learned so much about the rest of like physical production in that department. But grip also does construction. It's kind of the MacGyvers. They literally are the MacGyvers on set. That's why I can't remember the famous director who said that if he was ever on an island, deserted island, that he wants his key grip with him, because they really are a wealth of knowledge and information, and they are the MacGyvers on set.
Oh, this is so helpful, and it gives a lot of context to your role. It sounds like a very manual role, a lot of heavy lifting.
Yes, a lot of heavy lifting, and that's the thing is that the gear, all the gear is heavy and steel, and it's really not about either. It's not brute force. It's really about endurance and gripping because there is a lot of manual labor to it for sure. But it's you got to be able to endure 12, 14-hour days as well. So it's highly physical job. It's been
Mm.
it's been equated to, and this is from people like I have not served in the military, but I have a lot of ex-military guys, ex-Marines that I have worked with that have equated the physicality and even certain shows that we've been on together where they're like, this is worse than Afghanistan. I'm like, wow, that's saying a lot. Like it's a highly physical job.
Mm. I mean, it's long hours anyway for everybody on set, but then when you're doing manual labor for that entire time and sort of that level of physical exertion, it's just a constant workout that never stops.
It is. It really is. That's a very good description of it because it's the physicality of it. It's like I tell people that want to get into that department is just like stay in the gym. It's like it's so important because it is such a physical job and we do sustain injuries. So it's a dangerous job too. But I mean it's really fun. I learned a lot. It's it's still like I love my grip brothers and sisters.
When you're working on really any set, including this one, there aren't a ton of days off for people. Like the set is running pretty much the whole time. Maybe you'll have a day off here or there, but when you're grip and there are multiple grips on set, do you get an opportunity to sort of rotate in and out, or is everybody on set for the entire time that shooting's happening?
Um, so normally there's kind of a hierarchy. There's when you have like a core crew of people that they're, let's say it's the three main or the four main people that are on the crew, they are on for the entire run of the show. Now sometimes when it's location, they might have what's called day players come in, and sometimes, and I was day playing on season one. So I didn't work every single day, but I worked like 4 days a week, 3 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week. But the core crew that's there the entire time is there the entire time. Whether you rotate, usually you've got like, one guy at the truck, three on set, but usually everyone's on set. At least one stuff's happening, everybody's on set, and there really isn't opportunity to take days off. If you're a day player, then you're not committed to work the entire run of the show. So if I'm in there for 3 days and I know I've got 2 days off, but sometimes what you'll do is they can rotate out. Like if you want to take a day off and you're a core crew person, you can have a day player come in and take your spot. But no, there is no quote unquote days off. It's just like if the show is 7 months long, if the show is 10 months long, if the show and television is longer runs. If it's a month long, whatever, you're in there for every single day that camera's on set. That's there are no days off really.
Mm. You mentioned that you work with pretty much everybody, every department on set. Who do you work with the most, would you say?
Definitely with electric, because the hierarchy for grips is it's the DP and the gaffer and key grip are in charge of executing the lighting vision from the DP or director of photography. And we work side by side with electric. And rigging is also, depending on the size of the show and the budget of the show, whether you have an additional rigging crew as well. Halt and Catch Fire did have a rigging crew. So we work closely with rigging, but definitely with electric because obviously we can't execute a lighting vision without having, electrics or the juicers. But yeah, that's probably the department we work closely with the most.
What would a day in a life look like for you on a set?
Um, Early calls, 4 a.m. probably wake up, usually call times, 6, 7 a.m. Sometimes there's a pre-call. If you're on stage, it's a little bit easier with Halt and Catch Fire. It was broken in half with, we had stage work, but then we also had location work. So location days are a little bit heavier work, but typically it's, show up, unload the truck, kind of, I always look at the call sheet to see what the work is for the day, whether I'm besting or not. I like to know what we're doing. I usually get like a staging package ready, and everyone kind of, I've been working with seasoned people, so everyone kind of knows what they should be doing. You may have a day player come in that doesn't know what they should be doing for the day, and you have to kind of tell them, or they're their extra muscle. But it's a lot of kind of standing around and waiting. And then when shit happens, you could be working and lighting a set for, they'll come in, they'll rehearse, and then they'll say, okay, crew has a set. And then we come in and then we light the set. And sometimes it can take an hour, depending on, again, size of the show. But with Halt and Catch Fire, we would light for, maybe 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. And then, they come in and, everyone's kind of, it's a lot of organized chaos on set. And it kind of just all magically comes together when crews working together. But it's a lot of moving gear in, getting things. I like to do preemptive strikes. I don't want if I look at the call sheet, and granted, I'm seasoned enough now to know, if I look at the work and say, oh, I think that they're going to need this and this, or even go to the DP, and say, hey, I see this is on, are we still using this? And a lot of it is just kind of readying yourself more than anything, and not getting too much ready ahead of time. And then also not striking things too much ahead of time, because that also creates work. But it's a lot of busy work. And then you can be standing and not doing anything for like an hour, so that's kind of the norm in that department, and then really in every department, where you're just a lot of hurry up and wait.
Yeah. So one of the things that I love about this show is the artistry and camera angles, camera choices, how it's shot, in many cases, how it's lit. So, a lot of that was set early on with Juan Campanella's, pilot episode. You made a lot of choices that really allowed the show to go into artistry more so than just like stock standard. Does that change anything for you? Like, when you're able to tilt cameras and, when you're taking innovative approaches, when you're shooting through things instead of looking directly at them, does that change things for what you do as a grip?
As far as the director goes, it's really more on the DP when it comes to, we not saying that if the director asks us to do something that we wouldn't, execute what they want, but we don't really answer to the director. Like, that's not who runs our department. We are the director of photography, who I worked with, Jeff Jur, who's a phenomenal director of photography. And he is like I am. He's very OCD. He's very specific, and he wants it a certain way. And I like that. I prefer to work with somebody like that, as opposed to, and I have worked with both, where somebody's a little more loosey-goosey, and but it's more really the director, or excuse me, the director of photography, who's making changes and differences in the lighting and achieving that look and feel of that show. And that show does have a very specific look and feel. And it's really more the director of photography that's executing that.
And so Jeff remained a consistent presence for you.
Yes.
Across your time.
Yeah. Season 1 and 2, I know he was there. I can't remember if he was there on season 3 and 4 or not, but yeah. I enjoyed.
I don't know that he was there for the whole run, so I
don't think
feel
he
like
was
I've seen
either.
other
Yeah.
names. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that means, because obviously we get different directors for most episodes, but that means that person is interfacing with Jeff or whoever the DP is.
Right. Yeah, there would be guests, like, as different directors for each episode, basically. Like, that's how they run it in television. And sometimes a director will come back, like maybe they do episode 1 and then they'll do like episode 3, because there's a lot of like background work that's going on for the director who comes for the episode. So like there's prepping going on. So that's why they don't have directors that direct the entire series, because then they would have like no prep time, no time to get like kind of themselves ready for the episode. So that was usually what they do is they swap out, different directors for each episode.
Mm. So, with as many different projects as you've worked on in your career, what stands out to you about working on the Halt and Catch Fire set? What was different about this one for you?
It's really been, I do reference it as being one of my favorite shows to work on. I liked the content. I knew it wasn't going to last because it was too smart. It was ahead of its time. Had we been in streaming, I think that show probably would have gone on longer. But that show particularly, I mean, the crew is so great. It really was like family on set, and we were together for so many hours, but also to the cast. And I really loved that there was, um, Mackenzie and Carrie were like such like prominent on set, and like females on set. It was just I don't know, the vibe on that show was just different than a lot of the other ones that I've worked on. And maybe it was because there was more women in the cast, I don't know, but I really had such a good time. And the rest of the cast too, like all those computer guys and stuff, like I still have a picture on my fridge of me and one of the guys from the rap party, and it's just like it was such a good memory working on that show. That cast was just like so phenomenal. Everybody was gracious too, there's no egos, attitudes, and it just felt like everyone was just kind of working so well together.
Hmm. When you think back to the episodes that you worked on, are there any particular scenes or days on set that really jump out at you as big memories? It could be because you were proud of it or because they were challenging or whatever sort of comes to mind for you.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if it was season 1 or 2, but I do remember like, so the house where they had their computers set up, that whole
Meet the Mutiny House.
the mutiny house,
Mhm.
exactly.
That was
The
mostly season two. I think we saw it in the last episode of season one, but I think that was on a location, and then a set was built for season two.
Yeah, see, well, so for the season, so the mutiny set was on stage, and then the outside where they had like the party at the house, that was on location. So like the outdoor part of the house was on location, and that was always like really challenging. Like, but those were like my favorite memories of that show, was like the mutiny house and then going to location, because that location was kind of a pain in the ass, but I remember us getting a techno crane stuck in the mud down on a hill one day, and we literally had like grip and electric pushing the techno crane up the hill because it was raining. It was one of those things where, but yeah, the mutiny house, like that's where I have so many photos that I took, because like season 1, I was kind of like, I don't want to take too many photos because I don't want to like, I'm very like conscious of the whole, like, I don't want these to get out. And also too, I don't want to be obnoxious about it. And then season 2, I got kind of a little more like, I'm just taking pictures of everything. I don't care. But yeah, I have so many good photos of like, there were so many like cool things in that house that they had, like set deck had, like the mannequin, the girl with the bikini on. Like I have so many good photos. I have so many photos of Grips like either posing and putting their arm around her, kissing her, like, and it's funny because she would always have on like a different hat or I think it was a sombrero one time, and then like her bikini changed, and then like one time she was topless. It was just like a constantly like, we put money in her G string, it was just like constant kind of like, and I think that's why like that was such a good memory for me, was because like I really did enjoy working with that crew, but it was just like that set was so much fun. And then plus two, like, those computers are before my time, but I'm still very aware of what those computers are. And it was really cool. Like my brother is, he's a computer nerd. And I remember sending him photos of like the computers that were on set. And that was cool to see too. All of the stuff from like the 70s and early 80s was like super cool to have like those props on set, because you just don't see that stuff anymore.
Were there any favorite props of yours that you saw on set? There's a
Um,
lot of stuff crammed into that house.
there really is a lot of stuff crammed into it, and I'm happy to send you some of the photos that I have. But I'm trying to think, like the mannequin was definitely there was, oh, I know there was like a Miss Pac-Man something that I remember seeing. I'm a huge Miss Pac-Man fan, and I think it was like cable storage. I can't remember, but and there was a few other elements that were computer related. I remember they had like old like Duran Duran albums too on set. I was just like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Like, but yeah, like I think the computer stuff was like what stuck in my memory. And of course the mannequin.
Hmm. It's funny when you mentioned the outside of the house being, you had to go on location for that, and those were not easy days. But it's like when you actually look at the scenes where you see the outside of the house, there was one episode where we had a whole party, but for the
Yes.
most part, it's like blink you miss it moments in the show. It's like 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half of footage from the outside. So that meant
Yep.
you all had to get,
Yep. I
oh
know.
my
And that's
gosh.
what's, yeah. And I remember that specific house because this was shot in Georgia. I remember that house specifically because the location was a pain in the ass. Like the trucks couldn't be on the road at a certain time. They had to be off the road by a certain time. Could only drop during a certain time on the driveway. So we had to like stake bed in the items or carts that we needed. And I remember the driveway being a pain in the ass. And I remember a cart, like we lost control of a cart and it fell off the truck and it smashed on the ground. I just like, and it was always, it seemed like it was always rain. It's always raining in Georgia anyway, but it just seemed like whenever we worked that location, and then it was extremely like muddy and like I recall like getting into it with one of my grips there because it was just like, oh, it was such a stressful location just for the sheer logistics of getting our gear in and out. And of course everything's heavy like we talked about. And yeah, it was a rough location.
So when you would have had a whole episode there, like with the mutiny party, does that mean you have to just keep coming, like setting up and striking every day, or do you get to leave? I think because I feel like that was maybe shot over 2 days
Um,
with that episode.
Yeah, we very rarely that location was not there may have been one time that we could do that, but most of the time it was like if we were at the house, everything would have to strike. We could maybe put stuff. There was like a barn. I kind of sort of remember us maybe putting some stuff in one time, but most of the time that we shot there and we did go back and forth, it was like a loadout and everything had to load out, go back to base camp, and we couldn't leave it at the location, which is kind of a pain in the ass, even if we were coming back the next day. I
Mm.
think that was another, issue that we were always just kind of like, oh, this location, like as cool as the house was. And but yeah, it was because we were like, I remember it being on a fairly busy main road too. Like the house was kind of tucked back a little bit, but like I remember Crafty was on the front of the lawn and then like the street was just like right there. So it was just like it was busy. And then of course people are like, looking and see what we're doing and stopping. And but yeah, that was definitely a tricky location.
Mm. You mentioned a scene that you had some memory of with Mackenzie Davis and probably Mark O'Brien as well under the sheets in
Mhm.
bed at that house, and that would have been season 2. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that one because I specifically on a recap was like, how on earth did they shoot this? Like,
Oh my
there's
God,
just
that's so
like the
funny.
smallest window of space. Like, it wasn't like they were like holding the sheets open. Like,
No,
it
like
felt so intimate.
Our DP was under the sheets. I totally remember Jeff being under the sheet, like, and it was cool because I remember I was like watching the monitors, and I remember like them getting it set up, and I mean, there's a lot of laughing, of course, because it was just like kind of funny. And then it was just like when I watched it on the monitor and he was like under the sheet with the camera and I was like, oh my God, this looks like so good. Like this is gonna come out so good. And it was such a cool scene. Like, and I don't know, it totally stuck in my head. Yeah.
It's such like a subtle thing, but especially when
Mhm.
you're doing a deep dive, I just sat there thinking, there's no room there's no room for somebody to get this. You know, like it feels
Yep.
so intimate, and it's because
Yeah.
there's a third person under the sheet.
Yeah, totally.
Oh,
I mean,
great.
it's funny, and I think that, of course they shot her scenes first, without him, because it's, the DP looking at her with the camera. So that was how they achieved that. But it wasn't like all three of them at once. So,
Okay.
but it was cool.
Yeah.
Like it was just and I don't know whose idea that was, or like, and I don't remember because it's been so long in the script, if that was initially in the script. You know what I mean? Like I always love that because I'm a writer too. So I love to know, like, sometimes if that was initially part of the scene, or if they were like, hey, we should do this under the sheet. I don't remember that, if that was actually part of the script or if it was something that they came up with like on the fly. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it works really well though.
it
Either
did.
way, it landed on that because I think there's a really specific contrast that's happening between their scene and what's happening with like Joe and Sarah, where uh, there's all kinds of red flags and toxic energy happening in Joe and
Yes.
Sarah's relationship, and then you go over to these other two kids, and they're like being kids under the like it feels so innocent and
Yes.
intimate
Yes.
in a way that feels the opposite from what we're seeing from that other couple. So
No,
it was
totally. And
beautiful.
yeah, and like, and I even with, and I did watch the entire series, but it's been a minute, but I do remember thinking like, and I loved Mackenzie's character, but she was like naive. Like she was super naive that this guy was trying to get the information for, you know what I mean? Like but she was just so kind of like that was her character though. Like, and that scene definitely lended to that. It felt very high school, that scene. I loved it. It was cool.
Yeah. Any other scenes that jump out for you when you think back on this show? Seems like a
Um,
lot of season two stuff is sticking in your memory more.
yeah, definitely. Like gosh, probably should have like rewatched what all of
Well, I mean,
season
just in
one.
terms of some of the places, I don't want to say locations because that means something specific to you, but like we have the Clark House, where we're constantly going for the first two seasons. Cardiff Electric Office.
That's a great, I'm glad you reminded me of that. I have some great photos from that too. That was a set. And then two where, oh, that's right. Now you're reminding me of these scenes. So where Joe and, her name's escaping me, their place was, their apartment was on that same stage. And then I remember the Cardiff Electric where all of the servers and stuff were like, it was funny because there was this button in there and I don't remember what it was for, but it was like, do not push. And it was this like red button, and it was some like, probably like a cancel button, for like if something went wrong. It wasn't like for this, it was for the set. It wasn't for, for crew. It was a set deck piece. And I just remember like everyone would like go by and push it, because it's like, you tell us not to push it, we're going to push it. But that was a really cool set. It was a little tricky sometimes because of I remember something with the flooring or something separating on us. Okay, whatever we had to lay dolly track or anything in there, I remember being it like logistically challenging, even though we were on stage, because there was a lot of like moving of parts and pieces of the floor. I God, it's like feels like it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah. I'm also thinking if we go back to season two, there was another place that we saw a lot in season two, which was the mainframe room where Joe worked at West Group Energy. And it's this very blue and white space. And something that's been so interesting for me as I've been rewatching is that room feels like it looks different at every angle that you look at it from. And I'm continually surprised by new angles make it look like a different space. And there was actually a scene where I had to stop and say, is that the same room? It can't be the same room because it was the same room, but a different angle. It seems like there was so much creative energy used to, like, even if you were using a space over and over again, to try to shoot it in a different way. Which means that even if you had a set built,
Mhm.
that it wasn't just like, okay, leave the equipment where it is because we're going to use it like that again.
Yeah, I do remember that set. And then you just reminded me too of the house set in the garage, which was on stage. And then the office, like there was a fancier, I think it was Joe. I can't remember if it was Joe's office or
Are you thinking season 2? It could have been Jacob's office.
maybe it was, maybe it was.
James Cromwell played him.
Yes, okay, that's what it was.
Mhm.
But yeah, there was like, it wasn't like where some shows it feels like, you know, and of course, you know, Halt and Catch Fire was shot a little, I felt more cinematic to me. Maybe that's why I liked it so much too. Like the look and feel that we achieved, like you said, where it wasn't like, you know, and I've been rewatching Frasier recently. I love that show. But it's like always they come in the house and there's this angle from behind the TV and there's this angle from over here and it's the same one every single time. And it's like it's like with Halt and Catch Fire, they definitely took advantage of that space and using it differently, different coming in from a different angle. And you're right, it totally did feel like it was a different space, which I again feel like that lends to that show where it made it feel more cinematic to me. And now I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it because you're like making me think about all this stuff. And I really did love, I when anyone asks me about the shows that I worked on, that one always sticks out in my head as one of my favorite shows that I worked.
So I know you worked with all kinds of people, cast and crew, and you've had a chance to name some of them here. Is there anybody else that you want to acknowledge, people that you worked with really closely? That anybody that comes to mind for you?
You mean as far as the cast that was on that show? Like Scoot was amazing. Scoot was always just, everyone was always very professional, but Scoot was just very personable. And of course I got to know Mackenzie and Carrie, and they're just, you know, just such nice people, very down to earth people, you know, always thanking the crew. Like those are my favorite talent to work with, is anyone who acknowledges, you know, the crew and comes along, or like at the end of the day, like constantly like thanking crew and you know, and just being concerned or like asking you if you need something, and they're like the talent, you know. So it's like that's again why that show sticks out as being such a positive work environment that on set, because as you know, that doesn't always happen on a lot of the shows where, you know, and it felt very close knit. And I think that showed in the product that, you know, of Halt and Catch Fire. It really did come through. Like when you have a crew and cast that cares about the show, and cast cares about crew cares about the work, you know, like it shows. It's just a bummer it didn't last longer.
Yeah, it is, but I also feel like the way the story ended, I wouldn't want it to go for another season. Like it felt very much that it ended where it was meant to. So I think,
Yeah.
you know, when you're working on it, you want the job to go on forever if you like the job. But
Yeah.
it ended, to me, it stuck the landing. So it
Yeah.
feels satisfying in that way.
It did feel satisfying. I remember, because like I said, I did not work the last 2 seasons, but I remember watching it afterwards and just going like, oh my God, I love what they did with the story. They did such a good job. Like it did feel complete. Like I didn't feel like it just fell off a cliff, and you know, it really did. They did a really, really good job with that show.
And it's interesting too that you mentioned earlier that there was like a female energy on set, probably because you were working a lot with Mackenzie and with Carrie, and Melissa Bernstein, and there, you know, there were people
Yeah.
kind of all over who were women on the show. But you also, like, season 2 was also very like everybody else in the Mutiny House was a man.
Mhm.
So like actually, as the seasons go on, it becomes even more that way. You know, we had Annabeth Gish to the cast, and like they're I think the show goes further and further in the direction of bringing a female energy to it. So
Yes,
it's cool that you
definitely.
were already feeling that in seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah, I have this picture that I shot. I remember I emailed it to Carrie, and it was Carrie, Mackenzie. I want to say we had a female director, and her name's escaping me. And there was a producer, and I mean it was like 6 or 7 women, and it was all at Video Village. And I just remember taking a picture, and I walked over to her. I'm like, when do you ever see this on a set where you've got like this amount of women sitting here that are in like, not only just the talent, but in positions of authority. And it was just like that, it seemed that was what that energy definitely, I was happy that I was there to like experience that, because you just don't, you don't get that very often on set.
Yeah. So what are you, I guess this is a weird question. I'm learning how weird a question this is to ask. So I've been trying to rephrase it because it's been a sort of slow time in the industry for the last several years. But what are you working on now? What projects do you want us to be aware of that you've had happen recently?
Yeah, it has been slow here, and I bounced out of gripping. The last show that I gripped was Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and I don't grip anymore. And so I've moved to working on my own projects. I wrote a book about my experiences working in the film industry. I'm a first generation filmmaker, so it's basically everything that I learned, and it's titled Below the Line, a Film Crew Survival Guide. And it's everything I learned working in this industry, obviously from a female, point of view on set, working in a male dominated department. But it's not just about the grip department. It's about, networking. It's about the hierarchy on set. It's about how hard this industry is, and it's a very, I don't pull any punches. I didn't write it to talk about like, how glamorous Hollywood is. I wrote it to be honest about what you can expect, because it is a very brutal industry. But the book was published this month, and then I'm working on a couple projects that I won't talk about what they are, but I have scripted projects that I'm working on that I'm getting ready to pitch and peddle here in Los Angeles.
Amazing. So everybody, just to put a finer point on that, Below the Line is the book that you want, and Melanie Ragone is the author. And that sounds like a really interesting deep dive into what's happening, what happens on set, and what to expect. It sounds like it was written with the people in mind who might potentially get into the industry, but is it something that people would find interesting if they're not from the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, my main audience is the film student or the new person coming in. It doesn't matter what department either, but it also for any, cinephiles, because I do talk about, how the industry works, but I talk about the shows that I worked. I tell stories from set too. And then there's kind of like there's a glossary in the back that talks about this, it shows what slang we use, because we definitely do have our own language on set. So it's kind of fun that way too, where it's like, you normally wouldn't know about this stuff if you were, not in the film industry. Even my editor who edited the book, she's not in the industry, and she read it and she was like, oh my God, like this was so interesting. I didn't know anything about the film industry, and I feel a lot more educated now. I was like, oh, that's great. Like that's exactly what I wanted. But it's got some fun tales in it too. So
I'm sure we will eat that up. Okay, Below the Line, everybody, go get it. But thank you so much for having this conversation and being brave and sort of going back into the memory banks for a project that you did practically 10 years ago.
No, right? God.
Actually 10 years ago. Just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing everything. And not for nothing for starting this with the very ABCs of being a grip.
Yeah, of course. No, you're so welcome.
Yeah, it helped me. Hopefully it helps some people who are listening to this as well. But anything else you wanted to share about the show that you didn't get to mention, but you wish I would have asked it?
No, because you wouldn't have known this, but you made me think about this scene, and this is so funny because they wanted me to be the stand-in, and I refused because they didn't want to pay me more. So there was this scene where Joe's in the limousine, and his significant other, Sarah, is laying on his lap. Well, she wasn't there, so they needed a brunette to just be the stand-in. And then when I heard this on the radio, someone called me to set, and I was like, like, what's up? What do you like? And they're like, well, they need somebody to, be the stand-in. And, I'm like, well, what's the bump? Like, I'm not just gonna work for, you know what I mean? Like, you want me, I don't care if it's just my head on camera. And they didn't want to give me a bump. So I did not do it. And I don't remember who did it, but it was somebody else. So probably some poor office PA.
Oh my goodness.
I know my head's value. I'm like, I'm not going to do that for the grip rate.
Take the donut, folks. Ask for what you're worth.
For real. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, my head is worth more than that.
Yeah. I don't actually know how tall you are, but I'm guessing there was a fairly significant height difference between you and Alexa Palladino, who played Sarah.
I am almost 5'8". Yeah. So
yeah, that's like a good probably 6-7 inches difference.
yeah, I towered over her. She was very sweet. She was very sweet. It was funny because you're making me remember all this stuff. I remember her being like, they would call me to set quite a bit because there was some intimate scenes and she was uncomfortable with anyone being on set or whatever, but she was cool if I was there. And I was like, oh, that's good. If I can make her feel more comfortable and she can do her scene as a professional and I can, help with that process. And that's great because like, that's something that like, I wouldn't want to be in that position with a bunch of dudes standing around, like, so, but
But
yeah.
you don't know. I mean, especially if you're coming, I mean, she ended up being there for most of season 2, but I think when you're just starting the job, it's like,
yeah,
who are these people?
Yeah.
And let me just be intimate in front of them. I can't even imagine that.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But I guess that's another reason to make sure there are more women on crew.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Oh, incredible. Thank you so much for
Yeah, of
being so
course.
generous with your thoughts on this. What a blast this has been. And, to everybody who's watching this, go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Bye, everybody.